Welcome back to Pages with Emi. I'm glad you're here. If you're joining us for the first time, we are reading Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. We're doing it a bit every day. Consistency is key. And before I begin, I want to say a quick thank you to everyone who left a comment in the comment section from our last video. I genuinely love reading them, and they all make a lot of sense. And same reminder as always, while I read, listen carefully, pay attention to how I say the words and the pronunciations, the rhythm, the sound, the intonations. Your ears are learning even when your brain thinks you are just enjoying the story. So let us get started. Today we are reading chapter 1, and it says, No one's crazy. Your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.000000001% of what's happened in the world, but maybe 80% of how you think the world works. So in this one, we're going to divide this book into two. So we're going to have chapter 1A and chapter 1B, so we don't stay too long today. We should be able to finish in 15 minutes. I begin. Let me tell you about a problem. It might make you feel better about what you do with your money and less just judgmental about what others do with theirs. People do some crazy things with money, but no one is crazy. Here's the thing. People from different generations, raised by different parents who earned different incomes and held different values in different parts of the world, born into different economies, experiencing different job markets with different incentives and different degrees of luck, learn very different lessons. Everyone has their own unique experience with how the world works, and what you have experienced is more compelling than what you learned secondhand. So all of us, you, me, everyone, go through life anchored to a set of views about how money works that vary wildly from one person to person. What seems crazy to you might make sense to me. The person who grew up in poverty thinks about risk and rewards in ways the child of a wealthy banker cannot fathom if he tried. The person who grew up when inflation was high experienced something the person who grew up with stable prices never had to. The stockbroker who lost everything during the Great Depression experienced something the tech worker basking in the glory of the late 1990s cannot imagine. The Australian who hasn't seen a recession in 30 years has experienced something no American ever has. On and on. The list of experiences is endless. You know stuff about money that I don't, and vice versa. You go through life with different beliefs, goals, and forecasts than I do. That's not because one of us is smarter than the other or has better information. It's because we've had different lives shaped by different and equally persuasive experiences. Your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.0000001% of what's happened in the world, and maybe 80% of how you think the world works. So equally, smart people can disagree about how and why recessions happen, how you should invest your money, what you should prioritize, how much risk you should take, and so on. In this book on 1930s, America's Frederick Louis Allen wrote, The Great Depression marked millions of Americans inwardly for the rest of their lives. But there was a huge range of experience. 25 years later, he was running for president. John F. Kennedy was asked by a reporter what he remembered from the Depression. He remarked, I have no first-hand knowledge of the Depression. My family had one of the greatest fortunes of the world, and it was worth more than ever then. We had bigger houses, more servants, we traveled more. About the only thing that I saw directly was when my father hired some extra gardeners just to give them a job so they could eat. I really did not learn about the Depression until I read about it at Harvard. This was a major point in the 1960 election. How people thought, could somebody with no understanding of the biggest economy story of the last generation be put in charge of the economy? It was in many ways overcome by JFK's experience. That was the other most widespread emotional experience of the previous generation, and something his primary opponent, Herbert Humphrey, didn't have. The challenge for us is that no amount of studying or open-mindedness can genuinely recreate the power of fear and uncertainty. I can read about what it was like to lose everything during the Great Depression, but I do not have the emotional scars of those who actually experienced it. And the person who lived through it can't fathom why someone like me would come across as complacent about things like owning stocks. We see the world through different lenses. Spreadsheets can model the historic frequency of big stocks market declines, but they can't model the feeling of coming home, looking at your kids and wondering if you've made a mistake that will impact their lives. Studying history makes you feel like you understand something, but until you have lived through it and personally felt its consequences, you might not understand it enough to change your behavior. We all think we know how the world works, but we all only experience a tiny sliver of it. As investor Michael Batnick said, some lessons have to be experienced before they can be understood. We are all victims in different ways to that truth. In 2006, economists Ulrich Malmendier and Stephen Nigel from the National Bureau of Economic Research dug through 50 years of survey of consumer finances, a detailed look at what Americans do with their money. In theory, people should make investment decisions based on their goals and the characteristics of the investment options available to them at the time. But that's not what people do. The economics found that people's lifetime investment decisions are heavily anchored to the experiences those investors had in their own generation, especially experiences early in their adult life. If you grew up when inflation was high, you invested less of your money in bonds later in life compared to those who grew up when inflation was low. If you happened to grow up when stock markets were strong, you invested more of your money in stocks later in life compared to those who grew up when stocks were weak. The Economist wrote, "Our findings suggest that individual investors' willingness to bear risks depend on personal history, not intelligence, not education, not sophistication, just the dumb luck of when and where you were born." The Financial Times interviewed Bill Gross, and the famed bond manager in 2019. Gross admits that he would probably not be where he is today if he hadn't been born a decade earlier or later, the piece said. Gross' career concluded almost perfectly with a generational collapse in interest rate that gave bond prices a whirlwind. That kind of thing doesn't just affect the opportunities you come across. It affects what you think about those opportunities when they are presented to you. To Gross, bonds were wealth-generating machines. To his father's generation, who grew up with the endured higher inflation, they might be seen as wealth incinerators. The differences in how people have experienced money are not small, even among those who think they are pretty similar. Take stocks. If you were born in 1970, the S&P 500 increased almost tenfold, adjusted for inflation during your teens and 20s. That's an amazing return. If you were born in the 1950s, the market went literally nowhere in your teens and adjusted for inflation. Two groups of people separated by chance of their birth year go through life with a completely different view on how the stock market works. Or inflation. If you were born in the 1960s, inflation during teens and 20s, your young, impressionable years, when you were developing a base of knowledge about how economy works, sends prices up than threefold. That's a lot. You remember gas lines and getting paychecks are stretched noticeably less far than the ones before them. But if you were born in the 1990s, inflation has been as low for your whole life that it is probably ever crossed your mind. We're going to stop at page 15. In the next episode, part 2, we're going to start in page 16. So don't forget to leave what you have learned in the comments, and don't forget to get your digital copy of Psychology of Money, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.